Yes? We're good?
Yeah.
Well, good morning and hello, people. I'm grateful for anybody who turns on their camera so I can see who I'm talking to, especially when there's not this many people, so I can actually see everybody that I'm talking to. Okay, so this year we are headed for Sefer Melachim, which is kind of cool because I actually know something about Sefer Melachim. Good. So I don't know what, oh, good, more people. Just wait till she connects to audio and then I'll start. Hi, good morning, Esther. So we are talking about Sefer Melachim, and let's start with, again, I don't know your various backgrounds, but just to even out the score, let's just give a very basic where Sefer Melachim sits in Tanakh, okay? So we have Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Bereshit Shemot Vayikra Devarim, that's the Torah. And after that, we start Sifrei Nevi'im, the books of the prophets. The books of the prophets are generally split into two main blocks, which we call Nevi'im Rishonim, the early prophets, and Nevi'im Achronim, the later prophets, which is kind of a misnomer because it's not necessarily earlier versus later chronologically. The main difference between the so-called early prophets, which mainly come earlier in the Tanakh, physically in the book, versus the later prophets is that the earlier prophets, which are Yoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, and Melachim, Yoshua, Judges, Shmuel, and Kings, are more of a narrative, more of a history, more stories. Generally, we speak of the books from Bereshit, from the beginning of the Tanakh, until the end of Sefer Melachim as the history, okay? Because it's more or less one continuous, pretty much, line from creation, right, the beginning of Bereshit, until the end of Sefer Melachim. Spoiler, that's when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed and everybody's exiled. Okay, that's where we're heading. Sefer Melachim is a fascinating book, but it's not very optimistic, and we're going to see soon why. But as I said,
Can't hear you.
thank you. Can you hear me now? Hold on a second. Let's see if it's an internet thing. Thank you for saying that. Okay. Do you hear me better now? Those of you who are here?
Yes.
Yes, is better now? Good. Okay. So the later prophets, the latter prophets, which are Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, and Treasar, with the exception of Sefer Yonah, which we all know, are less stories or history and more poetic, prophesying, this so saith the Lord kind of books, okay, which are a lot harder to read. The historically or chronologically, most of the prophets and most of the latter prophets, or I actually say all of the latter prophets, okay, most of the latter prophets, parallel the time period of Sefer Melachim. In other words, those are the prophets, later prophets, who maybe we're going to see, some voice of later on. But generally speaking, let's say you have Yeshayahu or you have Yirmiyahu. Okay, so they are the prophets that spoke their prophecies during the time that the stories that are written in Sefer Melachim took place. Okay, we have the voice in Sefer Melachim of the narrator, who tells us this is what happened. Here is the stories. This is the how events unfolded. And what they don't say in Sefer Melachim is, and at the time there was a prophet who stood in the city square, and he stood on a soapbox and he said, "Da-da," right? And all that "da-da" is written in the latter prophets, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, most of the Treasar, except, as I said, for Sefer Yonah, which is a storybook, right? And the last three Nevi'im, the last three prophets in the Treasar, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, they prophesied during the second temple period. So that's after Sefer Melachim. That's when the history picks up again later in Esther, Ezra, Daniel, Nehemiah. Okay, those books. Okay, that was last year's class. We're going back in time. We're going back to Sefer Melachim. Okay, so Sefer Melachim is the last section of the history of the world and later the people of Israel, which started in Sefer Bereshit and is ending with Sefer Melachim. That's where we are. Okay, that's where we're in history. And soon we'll see what chunk of history that deals with. Let me just bring up my nice PowerPoint. Okay, I would like to think that you can all see this. Just nod, yes, okay, great. And let's make that look even nicer. And great, okay. So we are talking about Sefer Melachim. Okay, in the Gemara, in Baba Batra, the end of page Yudala, the beginning of page Tedvav, there's a discussion in the Gemara about who wrote which of the books in Tanakh. Okay, who are the authors of the books in Tanakh? So Bereshit through the end of Devarim is attributed to, this is the time when these are easy questions, so you can unmute yourself and you can speak up so I don't speak for an hour. Esther, can't hear you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Moshe wrote those. I mean, Moshe wrote them, but they were.
okay, right. Okay, that's real cool, but Moshe wrote them, right? Great. Okay. Except for the last 8 psukim in Tanakh, which is contested, and maybe Moshe wrote it in prophecy, maybe Yoshua wrote them, whatever. Okay. And then we have the book of Yoshua, which you can all guess was written by
Yoshua.
Great. Okay. Then we have the book of Shoftim. Okay, Shoftim come. Yoshua is the book that picks up where Devarim leaves off. Devarim leaves off with Moshe east of the Jordan. Moshe cannot enter the land, as we know, but all the people are poised on the eastern bank of the River Jordan, about to enter the country. That's how Sefer Devarim leaves off. Sefer Yoshua picks up with Yoshua being the next leader and taking the people into Israel. And Sefer Yoshua is about the first 14 years in Israel, 7 years of conquest, 7 years of settlement of the land. That's Sefer Yoshua. Sefer Shoftim picks up after that. At the end of Yoshua, Yoshua dies, and Sefer Shoftim, people start leaderless. Okay, and this is a big traumatic event. Okay, this is a problem. Let's just put it that way. Okay, this is a problem because we had Moshe, who was, the alpha leader ever. And he was taken over by Yoshua, whom Tanakh presents as a great successor to Moshe. And then when Yoshua dies, there is nobody to replace him. And Sefer Shoftim is about a situation in which we have all the tribes settled in their various places. And there's certainly no central leadership. There was probably local leadership. And over in Sefer Shoftim, we have the problem of an external enemy that comes and attacks whatever section of Israel they attack, and then some savior, shofet, leader, hero, arises from the local whatever geographical part of the country is in trouble, and he goes to war and he saves the world, saves the people. And that keeps quiet for a little bit, and then he dies, and it goes over again. Okay, so there's no central leadership anywhere in Sefer Shoftim. It's more of an ad hoc, as necessary leadership. After Sefer Shoftim, we reach Sefer Shmuel. Sefer Shmuel, I forgot. Sefer Shoftim was written by Shmuel according to Chazal. Right, Yafeh. Sefer Shmuel is written by
Shmuel.
That would make sense, right? Except he dies near the end of Sefer Shmuel Aleph. So unless you say he also wrote all of Shmuel Bet, everything that happened after he died in some sort of prophecy, which is possible because we kind of say that. Some people say that about the last Ipsukim in the Torah about Moshe. Chazal prefer to attribute the parts that Shmuel didn't write to Natan HaNavi and Gad HaChozeh, who are 2 other Navim who appear in Sefer Shmuel. Okay. Sefer Shmuel, we know we call Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet. in reality, there's no such thing. It's just Sefer Shmuel. The reason that we divide it into Sefer Shmuel Aleph and Sefer Shmuel Bet is because it's a very big Megillah, right? It was a very long scroll, very unwieldy, and so it made sense just for technical reasons to separate it into two. Those who separated it into two actually did a make sense job, because the first half of Shmuel Aleph, is mainly about Shaul HaMelech, and the second part, Shmuel Bet, is mainly about David HaMelech. Okay, Sefer Shmuel picks up where Sefer Shoftim left off by saying, well, there's no king, there's no central leadership, right? Eli was the Kohen Gadol, and Shmuel was the Navi, and he kind of acted as a sort of central leader, but not really, because he was a Navi. And then the people asked for a king, and they got Shaul. Shaul was king of all of Israel together, unified. He unified all the tribes into a kingdom in Sefer Shmuel Aleph. Sefer Shmuel Bet, he dies at the end of Shmuel Aleph. David HaMelech takes over. Okay, David HaMelech started small, since he was from Shevet Yehuda, and why am I talking about? Well, let me stop.
Binyamin.
Huh?
Go ahead.
He was from Shevet Yehuda, whereas Shaul was from Shevet Binyamin. Yeah, and this harks back to the original split between Rachel and Leah, right? We know that in Yaakov's family, things were not so simple. There was Rachel, who had Yosef and Binyamin. There was Leah, who had 6 of the other Shvatim. There was great strife between these two factions within Yaakov's family. It continues later on, for example, here between Shaul and David, Shaul representing the sons of Yosef, David representing the sons of Leah. And this is going to explode, this strife between the two factions, in Sefer Melachim, which we're going to reach eventually. Is going to explode when the kingdom, which David manages to unify, splits into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom, which pretty much represents the sons of actually all of them, and another southern kingdom, which is mainly Yehuda. Okay, so that's going to be the big split in Sefer Melachim. Let me just go back 1 second to Sefer Shmuel and say that when David took over from Shaul, there were still many people loyal to Shaul from Shaul's Shevet. And so David at the beginning was only king over Shevet Yehuda in Hebron, and only later he moved to Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is geographically on the border, and Shevet Binyamin is geographically on the border between what's going to be the northern and southern kingdom. It's kind of like a central place that borders between Shevet Yehuda and the other Shvatim, and so that is where Yerushalayim is situated, and David made that his capital, and eventually managed to win over all of Israel and unified the kingdom. This is wonderful. Okay, now we have David HaMelech, Melech Yisrael. This is like one of the highest points, because it's going to be better in Shlomo's days, but one of the highest points in Jewish history. And Sefer Shmuel ends with a whole bunch of stories at the end of David's days. David does not die at the end of Sefer Shmuel. Okay, this is a new development in Tanakh, because we know that Moshe dies at the end of the Torah, Yoshua dies at the end of Yoshua, and Shaul dies at the end of Shmuel Aleph. David does not die at the end of Shmuel Bet. Sefer Melachim opens with David's dying days. Okay, and that's actually going to be a question. Why is it that it ends? If we had the establishment of the kingdom in Sefer Shmuel, then Sefer Melachim should have started with, okay, let's take it from there and see what happens next. But Sefer Shmuel Melachim, as we can see, starts with the end of David's days. According to Baba Batra, Yirmiyahu Katav Sifro v'Sefer Melachim v'Kinot. Okay, so the author of Sefer Melachim, which spans about 400 years, is Yirmiyahu. We know Yirmiyahu mainly, besides from his own book, right? He wrote the book of Yirmiyahu, or he's the main speaker in the book of Yirmiyahu. But we know of Yirmiyahu mainly from Kinot, which is Eicha, right? We know Yirmiyahu wrote Eicha. Yirmiyahu was the prophet who stood on that soapbox for decades and warned of the upcoming Churban and berated the people, you are doing this, that, and the other wrong. If you just do this, that, and the other right, you can avoid the upcoming train wreck, which is going to be the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the exile. People did not listen to him for various reasons. We're not learning Sefer Yirmiyahu, okay, but he is known for being that prophet of doom, and he lived through the Churban. He was witness to the Churban, and then he wrote Sefer Eicha as a lamentation for what he saw. Okay, so he lived many, many, many years after at least the beginning of hundreds of years, right? After the beginning of Sefer Melachim. Being a prophet, I guess it's not difficult to ascribe the writing of all the 400 years of history to him. He also had, we will see, at his disposal, history books that were hanging around at the time, describing the history of the courts and the history of the Northern Kingdom, the Southern Kingdom. He had all these books at his disposal. So and whatever general knowledge was passed down. But I think the main reason why he is identified with Sefer Melachim is less because he happened to be at the end of it and happened to, live through the whatever it led up to, as he being the prophet of doom and the prophet who saw it and the prophet who cried about it afterwards, his outlook is that which shaped Sefer Melachim to be as it is, okay? Because as we know, any book that is written, certainly a history book, okay, is not just an account of events. And it can't be an account of events because in any history, even if I give you a complete history of what I did since this morning, which is only a few hours, I'm going to leave out stuff, right? If I say I got up and ate breakfast, I skip the whole part about me getting, brushing my teeth and getting dressed, right? And if I say I went to the supermarket, then you don't know where I parked and etc. Right? So anytime somebody recounts a story, they're going to pick out whatever points of the story they deem relevant to their listeners or to the message they want to pass on, right? And not only do you pick out certain points and eliminate certain points, but you also present the story or the facts, even if it's just bullet points, right? But you present the facts that you want to present in a certain way. There's a lot of ways I could say it, right? I could say, I went to the supermarket, I parked my car and I went in. Or I could say, I went to the supermarket, I spent a long time looking for parking, right? And I had to park really far away. That gives a total different spin on what it is that I'm saying, even if the facts are the same, okay? So it's what you say and how you say it that is, I think, crucial to the message you're trying to give over. Now, Tanakh, as a whole, I believe, is not a history book, right? It's not there to present us with facts. It uses the historical facts, certainly the historical books from Bereshit till the end of Melachim and whatever history books we have later. It uses historical facts in order to deliver a certain message. And each book and each author of each Tanakh book has their own agenda, so to speak, their own message of what it is they're trying to give over to the reader. And I think that Sefer Melachim is trying to give us, the readers, the ones who learn Sefer Melachim, a overarching, bird's eye view of that whole 400 years that says, this is what we did wrong, and this is why it led to the Churban, right? So the whole framing and the whole writing and the whole structure of Sefer Melachim is all, look, when we did so there were some good kings, but they eventually turned bad. And these kings were bad, and those kings were bad, and the people were bad, and they did this chait, and even when they did good stuff, they also did bad stuff, right? And if you present the whole history as, well, we did this sin and that sin and the other sin, it's not surprising that it all led to what Yirmiyahu was crying for decades. Of course, you're getting what you deserved. Okay, so that gives a very, I think, pessimistic and gloomy look on Sefer Melachim. However, that is kind of what it is, right? It's a book that shows us how from the really heights of the beginning of the book, which we're going to hit near the beginning when Shlomo builds the Beit HaMikdash, and he has a unified kingdom, and his kingdom is strong and rich and respected and safe, and Halavai today we had a situation like that, but it's like it was the heyday of Israel. How did we get from that to destruction and exile? Okay, so Sefer Melachim is basically a how-to book, right? If you want to get from that kind of great to that kind of shefel, to that kind of low state of the nation, well, here's how to do it. All you have to do is look at what we did, and that's and when you reach the end, it's like so obvious. It's like, okay, so yeah, so everything you said makes sense now. Okay, so I think that's why it's important for us to know that Yirmiyahu wrote this book, because he was the one who saw it. He was the one who helpless, right? He was kind of like he did everything he could to prevent it, but that's what happened. Okay, so we're seeing it kind of through his eyes. I'm stopping for questions now. Comments? Anybody? Anything? Hi, Talia. I didn't see you joined. Okay. So let's look for a moment at the structure of Sefer Melachim. This is a structure that I stole from Rabbi Alex Israel's book, who wrote a book of Sefer Melachim in two volumes, which is a good book and a good summary of Sefer Melachim. The reason this is cute is because it gives a chiastic kind of structure to Sefer Melachim, which is, I think, visually pleasing, because you could see that it's like one of these charts that mirror each other. Okay, so let me just show you how this works. Oh, I didn't say Melachim Aleph and Melachim Bet, similar to Shmuel and also similar to Divrei Yamim. Melachim was also one book, right? And we divided into Melachim Aleph and Melachim Bet just because of convenience. But as opposed to Sefer Shmuel, whoever decided to break Melachim into two books did it at a very, very awkward point. It's like they had a book and they said, how about here? And they broke it in the middle. Turns out in the middle of a story. So that kind of even the break itself makes it clear that the break is artificial, because nobody would have broken a book right in the middle of, happens to be the story of the king Achaziah. We're going to reach that when we reach the end of Melachim Aleph and beginning Melachim Bet, because it just won't continue. Okay, but just for convenience sake, because we have the prakim broken up the way we do, let's look at how we have here, okay? So the beginning of Sefer Melachim, the first 11 prakim of Sefer Melachim, is about the southern kingdom. Why do I call it the southern kingdom? Because there is no other kingdom. David HaMelech, as we said, is king over all Israel. When he gives over his kingdom to Shlomo HaMelech, he is also king over all Israel. Okay, so there's just one king. It's kind of imprecise to call it the southern kingdom. We can just call it one kingdom. Okay, there's just one entity that's under one central leadership. Okay, at the beginning of Sefer Melachim, the king in these 11 prakim, except for at the beginning when David HaMelech is still king and he's dying, but again, spoiler, he's going to hand it over to Shlomo HaMelech. Okay, Shlomo HaMelech is the king in these prakim, and the central thing that we hear about is the building of Beit HaMikdash. That is the enterprise. Okay, as opposed to the rest of Sefer Melachim, these 11 chapters are characterized, except for Parak Aleph and Bet, which are, like we said, story, narrative, history, whatever. But a lot of this, and it's going to be a little bit sludgy to get through, so we're going to a lot of these prakim we're going to kind of run through, because they're going to be lists of here are the materials that Shlomo needed to build a Mikdash, and building description. They built this and they constructed that and they fabricated this, and lists and lists and lists and lists for building Beit HaMikdash. Like here's how they did it on a very large scale, plus a bunch of speeches. Shlomo Melech and Achia, and there's a bunch of people who give a bunch of speeches. Okay, so this is different from the rest of the set. The rest of the book is, as we'll see, way more stories and stories and stories. But the first 11, or at least from chapters 3 to 11, is that kind of genre. Okay, because that's what it's about. let's just skip, you know what? Okay, not skip that. Let's go in order, okay? After Sefer, after these 11 prakim, for whatever reason, the kingdom splits. Okay, as I said before, this is splits along the historical lines of Rachel and Yosef, more or less. It splits into the northern kingdom, which is going to be known as the kingdom of Israel, Mamlechet Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is going to be known as Mamlechet Yehuda. Mamlechet Yehuda is basically just Shevet Yehuda and Shevet Shimon. We don't mention them very much, but they settled along with Shevet Yehuda. David HaMelech's followers, Shevet people, you know, plus whatever Levim, Kohanim happen to be in the area. Okay, that's more or less the southern kingdom with the capital in Yerushalayim. The northern kingdom was the by far bigger, stronger, you know, certainly geographically wider entity, and that is starting from northern Jerusalem all the way up. Okay, that is the northern kingdom known as Mamlechet Ephraim because the biggest Shevet in there was Ephraim, but it's basically all of the rest of the Shvatim that are in the north. We will see in Sefer Melachim that Yirmiyahu, speaking from his prophetic viewpoint, tends to see these two entities totally differently. Right, Shevet Yehuda is going to be the legitimate one. It's not that they split it into two. It's that the northern kingdom eventually split off from the southern kingdom. Right, so there's this nice kingdom of Israel, and then there's the ones who are the breakaway minion. Right, and that's the northern kingdom, and they're illegitimate. And they're illegitimate in two things. First of all, actually more than two things. First of all, they split off from the true legitimate king, which is any king that comes from the descendants of David. That's first of all. Second of all, Avodah Zarah, idolatry, was rife in the northern kingdom as opposed to the southern kingdom, also the southern kingdom, but it's mainly the northern kingdom that was blamed for it. In the southern kingdom, we'll see that we have a very clear succession of father to son to father to son to father to son kings, right? Pretty much all the way through till the end. In the northern kingdom, there are very few dynasties like that. It's mainly there's a king and he is taken over by a coup and he's killed and somebody else becomes king. And then he reigns for as long as he reigns, and then somebody, you know, kills him, and then you have the feeling that the northern kingdom is not really real. And this is kind of reflected also in Divrei Yamim, in Chronicles, where we see that for a different reason, for a different agenda, and written by different authors, Chronicles, which retells the story of the history from the Bereshit until the end of Melachim, right, the history books, but mainly focuses on the Melachim section. Talks mainly about the southern kingdom, mainly about, you know, everything that happened in southern, because that's the legitimate one, and kind of ignores just about everything that happens in the northern kingdom. Sefer Melachim itself, however, we'll see, gives a very balanced view of what happens in the north and the south. And interestingly, there's a lot of prophets, prophetic voices, prophecy going on in the northern kingdom, perhaps because they were the ones who were sinning more, and so they needed that prophetic voice more, and less in the southern kingdom. Okay, but that we're going to see that as we progress. Okay, so Sefer Melachim Perek Bet is when the kingdom is split, and the northern kingdom splits off into its own entity with its own king, with its own allegiances, right, loyalties, and pretty much with its own religion and certainly religious centers. Okay, then we have the bulk of Sefer Melachim, right, from the middle of Melachim Aleph till the middle of Melachim Bet. And this is the divided kingdom. The divided kingdom means that during this time we have two kingdoms. We have the northern kingdom and we have the southern kingdom. And when you have here histories, right, we hear of a kind of synchronized history. Here's what happened in the northern kingdom. Da 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 da. And at some point in the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom had a new king. And this is what happened in the southern kingdom. Da, 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 da. And then he died, or before he died, at some point there, when he died, there's a new king in the northern kingdom. And then we hear this history. And then there's a new kingdom here. And then we hear, right? So we're going to hear in these histories part, We're going to hear king after king after king and how they synchronize between the northern and southern kingdoms, right? So we're going to hear this and this and this and this and this and this. The center of Sefer Melachim are the stories of Eliyahu and Elisha, and you can see how much that takes up. It takes about almost a quarter of all of Sefer Melachim, and it's right in the center. So I guess Yirmiyahu saw that as central to his cause. But also chronologically, it was pretty near the center. Eliyahu and Elisha, we'll see, were two of the greatest prophets, certainly in Sefer Melachim, who were active in the northern kingdom. They are known as prophets of miracles, the miracle workers. They did a lot of miracles, but the miracles are fun and interesting, but less, I think, important to our case than what it is they were trying to accomplish. So that's what we have here. Okay, so that's central section of Sefer Melachim. Sefer Melachim, Perek Yud Zayin. Okay, this is it's going to be kind of a heartbreak, I guess, is when the Assyrians come and they basically overrun the entire northern kingdom and exile them to wherever they exile them. They disperse them all over. So there's I'm saying Shomron because eventually the capital of the northern kingdom is Shomron, just the capital of the southern kingdom is Yerushalayim. The capital of the northern kingdom eventually is Shomron, but I could have just written exile of the northern kingdom or exile of Ephraim or something like that. And all the northern kingdom, or most of the northern kingdom, is exiled, which brings an end to the split kingdom, because now there's no more split kingdom. There's no more northern kingdom at all. All that's left now is the southern kingdom, right? But as opposed to here, where the southern kingdom or the unified kingdom meant all of Israel, right, geographically, here, whatever's left is all of Israel minus that whole northern part. So basically all that's left is Yerushalayim and some of its surroundings, okay? And this is kind of dwindling toward the end. We have a count of the last kings in the southern kingdom in Yehudah, and it ends with Churban Beit HaMikdash. The Babylonians come, they destroy the Beit HaMikdash, they exile the people to Bavel, and that's basically the sad, sorry end of Sefer Melachim. Hopefully, if we get this far, we'll also get a little bit farther and find some sort of happy end that happens 70 years later. But we'll see how far we get in Sefer Melachim. Okay, next pause for questions, comments, complaints. Really? You can let me talk for an hour? Tough. Here we go. Well, if no other comments, then we're going to start. We're going to open Sefer Melachim. I'm going to bring up on screen everything that you need. If you are able to split your focus between a actual factual book and the screen, I think books are always better, because in books you can always turn the pages and see what came before and what came after, and you can also fact check and make sure that I'm not leaving out psukim that are inconvenient for me to explain. So if you have a book, that's great. But if you trust me, or if you don't want a book, then basically everything that I'm going to be saying and reading is going to be here on screen. Okay? So we're going to start with Sefer Melachim, Perek Aleph. Okay. Let's look. I'm going to first read and translate the first 4.5 psukim, and then we'll talk about them. Starts like this. V'amelech David zaken ba b'yamim. David HaMelech was old. My translations are never going to be precise. They're going to just give you the general idea. V'yichasu b'bgadim v'lo yicham lo. And they covered him with clothes or with blankets or with whatever, and he was not warmed. V'yomru lo avadav. And so his servants said to him, Yivakshu la'adoni HaMelech ne'ara betula. Let us find for our master, for your king, for your majesty, a virgin young woman, and she should stand before the king, but tehilo sochenet, and she should be some sort of maidservant, not clear what sochenet is, and she should lie in your arms, and your majesty will be warmed. Vayivakshu na'ara yafa b'chol gvul Yisrael, and they look for a beautiful girl throughout the borders of Israel. V'yimtzeu et Abishag HaShunamit, and they found this woman called Abishag HaShunamit, which means that her name is Abishag, and she's from a place called Shunam. This Shunam is going to come up later in the Eliyahu stories, but it's going to have no connection to this. So I'm just mentioning that. Vayaviu ota lamelech, and they bring her to the king. V'hanara yafa ad me'od, and this girl is very beautiful. V'tihi lamelech sochenet, she becomes this maidservant or helper or whatever of the king. V'tisharteo, and she serves him. V'hamelech lo yeda'ah, and the king did not know her, meaning sexually. Va'adoniah ben Chagit mitnaseh lemor ani emloch, and Adoniah, the son of Chagit, mitnaseh, kind of raises himself up, elevates himself, and says, I am going to be king. Okay. Now, even though you don't want to, you're going to have to talk. So there. And tell me, please, is there anything here that strikes you as something you'd like to mention?
Why are we talking about her beauty if she's coming to sort of, as in, what is her purpose?
Okay.
And what if she's sort of there to act in some sort of kisui, then what is the relevance of her beauty here?
Okay. So first of all, we have a question on the description of Abishag, right? If her only purpose is to warm him, why do we care if his beauty? Just, I think you can answer that, but I'll answer that and then I will make that difficult again, okay? I would guess that the reason that they looked for a Na'ara Betula and they found a Na'ara Yafa, is because the warming of the king with another human body would not have been enough. In other words, they didn't just take any warm body that they happened to found with a pulse on the street and say, why don't you lay next to the king, right? Which one could do, for example, if you ever see somebody dying of suffering hypothermia, right? And you put a body on a body, it's going to technically warm them up. That works, right? But there's a reason they looked for a beautiful woman. And I would guess that the reason they look for a beautiful woman, and since he's a king specifically for a virgin woman, is because the warming up may had to do less with technical lying side by side and more with some sort of physical relations he may or should have had with her. And that, I think, was supposed to warm him up. The downside of that explanation is that we hear that Hamelech lo yeda'ah, right? So if that's the purpose, and he did not sleep with her sexually, then presumably he would not have been warmed up, right? So maybe she didn't serve that purpose. Okay, so that's the whole issue. Am I being clear?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we know David does not exactly have a good track record with beautiful women. So it's sort of confusing as to understand what her role is with him.
Exactly. Okay. So the whole role of Abishag is confusing. Melissa, sorry?
And why we need this story here at all.
Okay. That's the next question I want to get to in half a minute. Okay.
I think that's the point. I
Go
think
on.
the point that he did not have sexual relationship speaks to the condition of David HaMelech,
Positively or negatively?
that he was negatively. In other words, that this is not the passionate king that takes the wife of someone else and, lust.
Okay. So let me just say that Chazal are split on this, and as usual, right? And some will say, well, this is totally to David HaMelech's credit, because David HaMelech already had 18 wives, and there was a cap on the number of wives that a king is allowed to have, and that was 18. And so he knew he was not allowed to have an extra woman, as wife or as partner. And so that's why lo yeda'ah, okay, which is very nice and generous of whoever has that opinion. But I agree with Serena that it seems more like a reflection on David's weakness, being old, being physically not competent anymore, or whatever. And that, if that's the case, then if you're wondering what the story of Abishag is doing here, it's doing here perhaps to point that out, right? to point out that David HaMelech is not only old and cold, right? He's also not the man he used to be. Let's use that in whatever wide, narrow or wide aspect you like. Yes, sir.
And I also think that that's why it's followed right after that with Adoniah ben Chagit mitnaseh lemor ani
Yafe.
emloch. It's
Yafe.
showing
Okay,
that he's
that's
weak.
answering Melissa's issue, right, which she brought up and now left. But what is the whole story here, and how is it connected to the next pasuk, right, which I started, and I think you're right, because usually a king is replaced upon his death, either by the person who killed him, or by his natural successor, whoever that may be, or by somebody else. Okay, but you don't replace a king during his lifetime. That doesn't happen. Okay, ever. We're going to have one example of that later in Sefer Melachim with Uziel. My son left, so I should take this off now. Do you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. But generally speaking, kings are not replaced during their lifetime. Okay. So we need some sort of explanation, and I think the first 4 psukim are indeed that. It gives you the background of, listen, David HaMelech is not functioning anymore. He has to be replaced. Okay. And here comes Adoniah in Pasuk Hey and saying, hey, okay, this is right, time is right. David HaMelech is not, as we said, the man he used to be. And so I'm going to be king, right? Sorry? Okay. Do any of these psukim remind you of anything else? Any other? Esther. Of course, right? When after Vashti was removed from being queen, in whatever way she was being removed from being queen, not clear, but she was no longer queen, right? And the king was missing somebody by his side, right? So we hear in Esther, and we all know this psukim, vayimru na'arei hamelech misharatav yavakshu lamelech na'arot betulot tovot mar'eh, right? So also there, let's go on a search for finding beautiful girls for the king, right? Which they did. Vayitav hadavar b'einei hamelech v'yaskin, and this idea found favor in the king's eyes, and he did so, or had it done so. Can you see a difference between that and our case?
Yeah, and Achashverosh took advantage of all the beautiful girls.
Well, not yet. I'm talking about just this pasuk. Before it took advantage. Just in this pasuk that I read.
Well, then the first case was Achashverosh knew what was happening. It's not clear that David knew what was happening, that David okayed it.
Right. Okay. We don't have David okay it. That's the point. Okay. Presumably he okayed it because it happened, right? But the way it's presented, and as I said before, how you present something is just as important as what you choose to present. Here, in the Achashverosh case, didn't mean that. We have Achashverosh responding to this idea, and Vayasken, even if he didn't go, he wasn't the one who went and looked for these beautiful girls. It's written in his name, like he presumably gave the order or something like that. He's active. He's like, okay, let's get show on the road. Whereas David HaMelech, let's find a pretty girl, and they found her. Okay, they came to David with this idea, and they just did it. Okay, you get the impression that David is totally out of the picture, totally passive. He's in the picture, but he's totally passive. Things are done to him. Okay, which again helps create the picture of a king who is not functioning. Certainly a man who is not functioning, right? But if you're looking and saying this is the person who is king of the entire kingdom of Israel, you realize that a vacuum is starting to form here, and we need some sort of something to step in. Okay. One more thing that may point to that, you know about late words, right? About leading words, about words that are repeated. Can you find?
Yeah.
Can you find the word? What's a good number for a late word? How many times do you?
7.
7 is a great time, right? Sometimes we have 5, we sometimes have 3, sometimes we have 10, but 7 is a good standard number. In these 4 psukim, there's a word that repeats itself 7 times.
Cham.
Hamelech?
Melech. Okay. Melech. Okay, what kind of a melech is he? All right, that's kind of ironic. It's like here we're saying they're all treating him with respect like the king because he is the king, right? But you get the impression he's kind of like a hollow shell, right? Even this girl that they found for him, he didn't sleep with her, and therefore he was probably not warmed. Like nothing works. She's just passive and on his way out, so to speak. Okay, and that leads into the Va'adoniya ben Chagit mitnaseh limor anim loch, right? Not surprisingly, he's the one. Somebody comes and says, "Okay, I want to be a king. I'll be the next king." Okay. I want to look for a moment at the first expression that we have here. Va'melech David zaken ba b'yamim. The King David was old. Ba b'yamim, I don't know, coming in days, filling in days. But it's an expression, a Tanakhi expression for aging. Okay. Does that sound familiar? Do you know anybody else about whom we say? Avram, right? And I'll tell you something else which you may didn't know, which is Yoshua. Okay. The only 3 times
Right.
in Tanakh that we have Zaken ba b'yamim are David, Abraham, and Yoshua. Okay. We have in Avram, right? Abraham Zaken ba b'yamim, Hashem berachet Abraham bakol. When do you remember when it is in Avram's story that we hear that Avram is aging? Or what happens next?
Before, is it in Kayasara?
Is
Like
in
before he sends out to find a wife.
before he sends out to find a wife. It's like if okay. He realizes he's getting old, and we need to transfer the legacy, so to speak, on. Okay, so we need somebody else. So he has a son, he has Yitzchak, but it's going to stop with Yitzchak unless Yitzchak has kids too, right? So when Abraham Zaken ba b'yamim, the next pasuk says he calls his servant and he says, "Go find a wife for Yitzchak." Okay, that's his continuing his legacy. We have Yoshua Zaken ba b'yamim. You see this is in Yoshua Kaf Gimel. Kaf Gimel is the next to last parak in Sefer Yoshua. He has finished his role as conqueror and divider of the land, and he did his thing. And now he's about to end his life. And the last thing he does before he ends is he says, "Okay, I'm dying. I'm going to make sure that everybody is settled where they're supposed to be." He divides up the nachalot, right? And he takes the Eretz Yisrael and he says, "Okay, this is for you, this is for you, this is for you." This is what he does at the end of his days, and he gives a speech to the people, and he says, make sure to keep the Torah, and he sets up things for. It's like kind of like it's not even a last will, but it's more of a organizing his affairs, right? That's what he does before he dies, right? And then you have David. David is the first legitimate king of Israel. Why am I saying the first legitimate? Shaul HaMelech was legitimate in that God chose him. But we know from Sefer Bereshit, if we go back then, when Yaakov blesses his sons at the end of Sefer Bereshit, before he dies, he says to Yoshua, to Yehuda, Lo yasur mechokek mi ben raglav. Yehuda is going to be the shevet from which kings are going to stem forever. Okay? So it's very nice that we had Shaul. He's the first king. He's God appointed. He's king appointed. He's people appointed. That's great. But we know that we need a king from Shevet Yehuda, and that's David. And from the moment David becomes king, it is not legitimate to have a king from any other Shevet other than from David's descendants. Okay? And he unified the kingdom. He inherited from Shaul. He expanded it. He did, David HaMelech, Melech Yisrael, did all the great things that he did. And now he's becoming old. And what does he do before he dies?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. And I want to show you another way to look at this nothing. Okay. We saw Hamelech lo yada'a, which is Bible language for saying he didn't sleep with her. Okay. But the shorish is yada, to know. Okay. And interesting, in Sefer Shmuel, somebody once pointed this out to me specifically. In Sefer Shmuel, we have an ongoing rivalry between Shaul and David, right? Throughout the book, Shaul is king, at least throughout Shmuel Aleph, Shaul is king, and David is aspiring king, and how that works out between them. And if you look in Sefer Shmuel, the two main not main, but key words or late words, verbs that come up a lot are ra'ah and shama, to see and to hear. Okay? Seeing and hearing are the two main ways that people get information about the world. Information is power. And if you look, it's interesting. If you look next time you read Sefer Shmuel or parts of Sefer Shmuel, right, pay attention to these two verbs, and you'll see that very often Shaul HaMelech is presented as somebody who didn't see, who didn't hear, nobody told him, right? He's king, but he's always kind of lacking information. Whereas David is very often presented as someone who heard this, saw this, knew this, right? He's the one who possesses the information, which kind of gives you the feeling like, well, he's the one who should be king because he knows what's going on, right? So throughout Sefer Shmuel, I think that is a key to understanding, Shaul's demise and David's rise is the how much information they have access to, where they are, what's going on, as opposed to, like Shaul often says, no, nobody told me, right? Whereas David always seems to know what's going on. And here at the end of the day of his life, we have Hamelech lo yeda'ah, which again does not mean information, but it uses this verb, and it uses this verb later on also, we're going to see very soon in 7 psukim later, when Natan tells Bathsheba that Adoniah is trying to be king, and he says, Va'adonenu David lo yada. He didn't know. Okay, so you get, I think, just with these two appearances of the verb yada, here it refers to the physical. Here it refers to the mental or the informational or cognitive, right? In both cases, you have the king does not know. He's lacking. He's lacking physically. He's lacking cognitively. You really get the impression that David HaMelech, from all his greatness, has now become an empty shell of a man who is no longer capable of being king. And it's really this disconnect between David and the fact that he's king, okay, or reality, that kind of necessitated somebody to swoop into that vacuum, and the person who swoops in this case, is Adoniah. Okay, so that kind of explains, I think, why we have those four psukim as backdrop for the main issue that's coming up next, which is Adoniah trying to be king. Seder?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have like this. Va'Adoniah ben Chagit mitnaseh lemor, anim lo chaim. So Adoniah says, I'm going to be king. Vayas lo rechev uparashim v'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav. And he makes for himself a chariot and riders and 50 people running ahead of him, which is kind of like a kind of Ginunei Malchut, how we say this. He's putting on airs, right? He's putting on airs of importance, self-importance. Who is this Adoniah? If we look at Shmuel Bet, we have occasionally, so a few times in Sefer Shmuel, we have like summary lists of David's family, David's cabinet, David's whatever. So in this list, we have the first 6 children that David had in Hebron, when he was still king in Hebron, before he became king in Yerushalayim. And we hear like this: Vayvaldu David banim bechebron. David had 6 sons born to him in Hebron. Vahi bechoro, his eldest son, was Amnon, by a woman named Achinoam HaYisraelit. What happened to Amnon?
Like he was
Go for it.
he was killed by his brother.
Right, because of the Amnon and Tamar story. Okay, so Amnon is no longer in the picture. He was killed in Sefer Shmuel. Umishnehu, and the second child that was born to him, was a man named Kilav, La'avigail Eshet Naval Carmeli. If you remember the story in Shmuel Aleph, there's a story about David and Naval and Avigail, and at the end, Naval dies and he marries Avigail. And Avigail there in that chapter is presented as a very smart woman, very diplomatic, right? She certainly has her wits about her. And he has a child with her named Kilav. And I'm guessing perhaps because she had her wits about her, we never hear about this Kilav again. Okay? So he is not, I guess today is a good day to talk about politics. So he disappears from the political scene. He's not killed, he doesn't act, he doesn't say anything, he's gone, okay? He's not in the running, okay?
Not a contender.
Yes. Sorry?
I said he's not a contender.
Yeah, I thought you said, wait a second. Yeah, he's not a contender. He pulled himself out of the race, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he died an early childhood. We don't hear anything about this Kilav again. Vashlishi, the third son, Avshalom ben Ma'acha bat Talmai melech Kshur. Okay, this Ma'acha bat Talmai is a princess from the from north of Israel. Chazal say she was a Isha Yifat Toar that David won in some war. And the son he had with her was Avshalom. What happened to Avshalom?
He was also killed.
He was
by
also killed. He
Yoav.
tried, he tried to rebel again, or he did rebel against David HaMelech. There was a war. At the end of the war, he was killed. He was the one who was killed. He was caught by his
Right.
hair in the tree, if you remember that, right? And he was killed by Yoav at the end of the war. Okay, so he's out of the picture. Varavi'i Adoniah ben Chagit. Okay, so this person that we're talking about now is really technically the next in line. Right? And then we have a Chamishi Shvatya, and then we have a sixth kid also, but they're not, if you go by primogeniture, right, whoever's born first, Adoniah is the next person in line. And so when he says, okay, I'm going to be king, this is actually logical. Now it makes more sense. Well, let's put it this way. Had David HaMelech died at this point of natural causes, let's say, I think the makes sense choice for the next king, and here's the first time we're setting up a dynasty in Israel, right? Because if we go back to let's say even Sefer Shoftim, we said that a shofet is raised ad hoc when he's needed from whatever place, right? That was certainly not a dynasty. The first king we had was Shaul. Had he established a dynasty, then his son would have been king after him. His son was Yonatan. Yonatan actually pledged his allegiance to David and was killed. Yonatan was killed with Shaul at the war at the end of their lives. And David became the next king. So that's not a dynasty, right? It moved over to David. So David is the first king now who's about to establish a dynasty. There's no other contenders other than from within his family. And so his son is going to be the next king. That's wonderful. Which son? He has a lot of sons. Adoniah is the next son. So had David died of natural causes, Adoniah would have been king. The problem here is Adoniah is trying to take over the kingdom while his father is still alive. And that we said is a thing that does not happen. You do not become long live the king until the king is dead. Long live the king, right? And the king is not yet dead. So the problem here is not that Adoniah says he's going to be king. He's the make sense candidate, but that he's doing it before David is dead. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't understand why Kilav was nudged out of the
I don't think he was nudged out. As I said, his mother is Abigail. He's not mentioned. Nobody, he's not mentioned
I
anywhere.
know.
Nobody nudges him out. Yeah.
so I'm wondering what happened to him.
Seminar paper. Go write one.
I
don't
guess
know.
it's not in Divrei Yamin either, huh?
He's mentioned. He's mentioned as a son of David in Divrei Yamim.
Oh, but that's it.
That's it. I'm saying if I had to guess, I would say his smart mother Abigail said, keep your nose out of it.
Ah,
But that would just be my guess because that's not written anywhere.
okay.
Okay? He's out. Okay, so Adoniah. And he does this Rechev u'parashim v'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav. Any of you who know Sefer Shmuel should find that also familiar. Avshalom, who we mentioned, number 3 here, when he rebelled against David, he started off his rebellion like this. We hear, let's look at the second pasuk here. Vayaslo Avshalom merkava v'susim v'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav. Okay, he also, when he tried to rebel against David HaMelech in David HaMelech's lifetime and to become king, he also had this chariot and horses and 50 people running ahead of him. By the way, the 50 people running ahead of him is also going to come up later in the Eliyahu stories. We're going to see that also. Running ahead of chariots is like a way of showing respect, okay, to a king. And so he put on these airs of kingship. So this is like, I guess, how you show the world that you're a king. Now we have
That also reminds us of the Megillah.
yeah. Oh yeah, with the horse,
Yeah,
right? When you have somebody leading you.
Yeah.
Right? We do that till today, right? When you have a president come, right? He's riding in his limousine or whatever, but you're going to have this whole cavalcade of cars ahead of him and some behind him, right? But some cars ahead of him with the flags and whatever make way for Prince Ali, right? And they drive up ahead of him. That's also a way of showing till today respect. That's what one does, right?
Right.
Now that you mentioned it, I'm thinking that's probably also what flower girls do.
yeah,
Right? You go before the person who is important and you kind of make the way ready for them.
right.
Okay, so that's a way of doing it. The issue of Rechev and Parashim may also remind us of Mishpat HaMelech. Right? When we hear in Sefer Devarim about how a king should or should not comport themselves, right? We hear that there are 3 things that a king should not do. One of them is have too many horses, one of them is not have too much money, and one of them is not have too many wives, right? And the reason for one of the reasons given there is levilti rum levavo mecha. He should not consider himself above his brethren, because as opposed to other ancient Near Eastern kings and also modern kings as well, where kings are considered to be above the law and people are servants of the king, right? As opposed to that, Israel came up with a whole new theory of monarchy, which says the king is a servant of the people. The king is not above the law, usually. The king is a servant of the people and a servant of God, right? God is the one who is, right, the king with a capital T and capital H, right? So if you have this king putting on airs and considering himself all la-di-da, that kind of opposes the general purpose of your number one public servant, right? So when he has all these Rechev Parashim and 50 people running ahead of him, and he says Ani and look, I'm going to be king, right? Putting the word Ani first, that also kind of, I think, is a play as a word against him, a point against him, and a further point against him, if you wish, is that we don't often in Tanakh have complete character portraits of the characters, of the players. It's not like when you have a novel, right? And the author will tell you, describe the person in detail, right? But occasionally the narrator in Tanakh, the speaking voice in Tanakh, which again we could say here is Yirmiyahu, but whatever, whoever the speaking voice happens to be, the one who's saying these psukim, right? They kind of can slip in words or descriptions, or again, it's the how you bring over your information that can help you understand or see what the author, what the narrator thinks about their subject, right? A great example, I think, is in Hagar's story, right? When you have Hagar running away, being sent away with Ishmael, right? And then the Ishmael finds his way under the bush when they run out of water. Right? It doesn't say "Vatasimehu," "Vatasem et hayeled tachat achar hasichim." She puts the child under one of the bushes. It says "Vatashlichehu." She casts him off. Okay, and that's I think the author's way of saying a negative represented. Because what kind of mother casts their dying son off? You don't cast them; you place them gently, or you hold them, right? So here we have the narrator saying "Mitnaseh lemor," right? He becomes uppity, right, and says. It could have just as easily said "V'Adoniah ben Chagit Amar Ani Imloch," right? But the fact that you have the mitnaseh is already a character. It's characterization. I think that works negatively. That projects Adoniah in a negative light. Okay, and you add that to all these parashim, all these horses and people. It doesn't look so good. Okay. The next thing that we'd expect here is Pasuk Zayin. Let's skip up for a second. Now that he says Ani Imloch and does all these things, now how does he carry out his plan? Vayu dvarav im Yoav ben Tzruya. He talks to this person and that person and that person, and he carries out his plan, right? But before we, well, and we're going to read that soon, but before we hit that, what he does next, we have a little bracketed background that the narrator is throwing us here. And it says, Velo atzavo aviv miyamav. And his father never stopped him, never hindered him. His father being David, never, never told Adoniah off. For what?
Announcing
Huh?
announcing that he was king, yeah.
Maybe for saying he's king, except it says La Tzavo Aviv miyamav, ever. Lemor madua kacha asita. So maybe madua kacha asita refers to vaya aslo, right? He never, Adoniah did so and so, and David never said, why did you do so and so, right? But when you have miyamav, it sounds like not he didn't stop him now. He never told him off. This is like a spoiled child, okay? He never told him off. And we also hear, v'gam hu tov toar me'od, and he is also very good looking. Who is Gam? What is also? He is very good looking. And also who? Or rather, he's very good looking like who? You know what I'm
David?
saying? Huh?
David?
Maybe. Okay, but we never have David as good looking.
Oh, Avshalom.
Avshalom. Okay, and we even hear him mentioned here, Va'oto Yalda Avchrei Avshalom, and he was born after Avshalom. Okay, so you have a kind of parallel that we're having here. Just like Avshalom, he has these 50 people. Just like Avshalom, he was very good looking. And just like Avshalom, he was a spoiled child whose father never told off, right? And that, I think, gives us the background for which we're supposed to say, and so this is a rebellion, right? Just like Avshalom's. Now, it's not really a rebellion because David really needs at this moment a replacement, right? So it's a little bit harsh to portray him in this light. On the other hand, he is doing this before David is dead, and this is how he's being portrayed as. But just by the parallel with Avshalom, it seems like the author is trying to tell us, send off the red lights, the bells that saying, wait a minute, this is not so kosher. Okay. Tov, I think that is where we're leaving this for today. Questions, comments, complaints?
Thank you
Great. I hope I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.